Hey, what's up, everybody? This episode of Cyberpunk Uncensored is all about net running. And today I have a special guest with me, my buddy Daniel. What's up, man?
Hey, pretty good. How are you?
Good, good. So anybody that's been following the live gameplay that we were doing, months ago when we were doing the 2020 Red Starter Kit Hybrid, and then now running the official Red campaign. If you're familiar with Curly or on Rio, the Netrunners in both those campaigns, those were run by Daniel. So that's who I have on today, and I'm excited to have you because I've had Eric on. Val has been on, so we've had like some of the other players, and I really wanted to get you on because not only do I enjoy playing with you, I love the way you run the characters and stuff, and you're a nice dude. I enjoy you as a friend, but also you've been a net runner, pretty consistent for months. You did it when we were pulling from 2020 and Red Starter, and then going into official Red. So it's really cool to kind of get into that. But before we get into that, why don't you get into who Daniel is? Take me back to your first time role playing games and getting into Cyberpunk, all that stuff. Just give kind of a
Sure.
breakdown so people can get an idea who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I've been I've been a huge fan of the cyberpunk genre since I was a kid. I mean, I'm in my late 30s. So, I first got into, cyberpunk reading Neuromancer by William Gibson. And obviously, for those that have read that book, the main character is effectively a netrunner. He is the guy that, kind of starts out a little bit, downtrodden and having some issues, but he is a console cowboy. He is the guy that, jacks into the, matrix cyberspace and does runs and, hacks and that kind of thing. And I read that book, love that book. It's one of my top favorite books. And also around that same time, this would have been like 96, 97. Wizards of the Coast came out with a game called Netrunner, which is based on, pulls much of it from Cyberpunk 2020. And so I, being a fan of Magic the Gathering and several other games, got super into, Netrunner, the card game. And it, was the idea of, jacking in and, doing runs and having to break through black ice, these, intrusion countermeasure
Yeah,
programs that you have to like kind of fight, and they weren't just in the real world. I'm also an IT guy, so technology is kind of my thing. Hacking is pretty boring. Like the true concept of hacking is you running programs, typing in code. Like it's not
yeah,
in the cyberpunk genre, especially cyberpunk 2020, netrunner, stuff like that. You're there, you're fighting, you're attacking these programs and these worms and these other things that is just much cooler. It is very much a style over substance type idea. So I
oh
mean,
yeah,
I've been doing tabletop since I was a kid. D&D mostly. I play a D&D game every week with friends I've had for 25 years. And
that's awesome.
luckily I've got into with you doing cyberpunk. So that's kind of my background. But yeah, I've always been a fan of that netrunner hacker concept since I was a
Yeah.
kid.
No, me too. I remember when I was super young and I was into computers and things like that. My buddy Eric, actually, who actually got me into Cyberpunk and BattleTech as well, he was into like computer stuff, and that's what kind of got me into that. And I got my first computer, and I mean, it was so basic, but my granddad taught me how to write like some basic code. So when you would ask questions, it would answer almost like an AI. So I was like making all
Hmm.
these random potential answers to potential questions, and I was like trying to make the computer like it was alive. And then I remember seeing movies, even though it's not full on net running style, but like the Lawnmower Man and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I remember just thinking it was so cool, like getting into like the system or whatever, like on the net. And then at the time there was like these VR stations set up around like malls where it was just very basic, but you could put them on and like actually like shoot this ball laser at your friend who is standing 20 feet away. But in the VR, it was like you're on this weird map, and it was very like Cubert style, like very pixelated and weird.
Yeah.
But it was just so cool to me as a kid. Like I was always a fan of that stuff, and then obviously getting older, like movies like The Matrix and Hackers and all the different things that made it exciting. It's just very cool. But first, full disclosure, I wasn't a fan of net running in Cyberpunk 2020.
Oh,
You
I
know?
mean, it was one of those things. So I didn't play Cyberpunk 2020, even as a young kid. It was one of those cases when I was, my teens in the late 90s and 2000s, when I was in my 20s, it was all D&D. Like nobody, I didn't have any friends that were like into the sci-fi, cyberpunk thing. It was either D&D or Star Wars, which I'm also a huge Star Wars fan. So it just wasn't there. And then when I kind of started, it really came into when 2077 was announced. It was like, oh, and God, what was it, like 2013 or something? It
Yeah.
was like, oh, they were coming out with this game. It's based on Cyberpunk. I remember, hearing about this, RPG way back in the day, and I know it was based on Netrunner, which I was a huge fan of, when it was made by Wizards of the Coast, and this is the game I want. And it was, then it was like, well, let me look at, let me go revisit that and kind of get into that, look at 2020, see if I can get into a group. And it was like, God, the net running thing is its own game. Like it,
Yeah.
and it would be cool if you would have to have a group of just net runners, and then everybody's in the Matrix and maybe fighting off, other net runners and black ice programs. But the game, in 2020 was very much a, like, if you were a net runner, you either took over the game or you really couldn't do anything. And
Right.
that's
And
why I so appreciate what they've done with Red.
oh, 100%. Yeah, no, it felt more, back in the day or in 2020, that it was separate than the team, because once you engaged in net running, there wasn't this sort of dual meat space and net running cohesiveness. There wasn't like, the potential to interact in both. You have to, you could do it remotely because you would just get on the internet. Because like, as we know in Red, there's no internet. You have to hack systems within 6 meters, which makes it, extra exciting as well. But
Yeah.
it was just like you said, it was almost like its own fucking game. Like it was its own like sort of digital dungeon crawl or whatever, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it was like really, really, and it was also like a bit, I don't know, big. Like
It was, well, yeah. I mean, the way for in 2020, it was like you have this entire thing where you jack in, and there was an entire map, and the map is kind of the internet laid on top of the world. So, but you can transport yourself from one side of the planet to the other in the net almost instantly. Like, it was very large. So, like, if you wanted to do anything in that world, like you were kind of, for GMs, is you either couldn't do it service, in which case then what's the point?
right.
Or you had to do it service, but then you're kind of doing a disservice to the rest of the players who have no interaction with that world.
Exactly. No, I felt the same way, and I didn't GM as much back then as I do now, obviously, because now I'm GMing all the time. I love it, but yeah, back then I was more of a player, but I would GM like with a couple of my buddies, and we would take turns and stuff. And yet we never involved net running because of that, because it was just so separate and difficult, and just everything we just said. But
Yeah, everything I've heard is that is the unfortunately viewpoint of everyone else.
Yeah.
In which case is why I think they designed it in such a way in Red to combat that.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get into. Let's take this conversation to Red. Let's get into, where net running is. And what's cool is we can discuss a lot of it because, a lot of the details were released in the the jump start kit.
Yeah.
So we can kind of talk about all that. We can talk about, we do have the advanced rules from our Talsorian games, which is awesome. We're appreciative of that. We can talk about what's up in there that maybe isn't covered in Jumpstart. We just can't read it directly or go into too much detail.
Yeah.
So anybody listening, just understand that if anything's a little vague, it's because, we have to protect the IP and let our Talsorian do what they're doing. And let's say that first before we get into this. I'm definitely one of the people, I'm happy to wait. Like every time that they're like, hey, we have a few more delays, we want to match the lore up with changes to the video game. And like, I like the fact that they're putting so much detail and making sure that from 2020 through Red up to 2077, it all makes sense, and it just makes the world so much more real. And I'm like, obviously I want it right away. Like I want everything released in source books and let's get into it. But
Yeah.
I understand what they're doing and I appreciate the wait because I know they're busting their ass to make it as awesome as they can, you know?
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I am very much not a patient person, especially when it's like I want something.
Right.
I'll usually try to go to my way to make it happen, But I very much appreciate all Telesorian games from not rushing the product out. I want it to be good. I don't want it to be good. I want it to be great. So I want it
Exactly.
to be what their vision is, what they want, and since they're able to, in this rare case, work with a company like CD Projekt Red, who, for those that didn't know, made the Witcher series, is obviously making the new Cyberpunk 2077 game. They're allowing to work very closely and tie the worlds in the lore together.
Yeah.
And both companies have had delays. There's always delays in certain things. Obviously, COVID-19 has thrown the entire planet in a loop. So, like, I would rather, as much as I want those games, I would rather they get it done great, get it
Yeah.
done well, make sure it's the vision they both have. And, if it takes, the end of the year, next year, if it gets delayed, I'm okay to wait as long as it's a great product when it comes out.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that he said, like, and I'm an impatient person. Like when I want that, and it almost reminds me of like that old school South Park episode where I think it was the Chinese or Japanese making something or making fun of Americans. Like, I'm an American. I really, really want that. I want that. Like talking about like Americans always want things. They don't need
Yeah.
it. They just want things all the time. But but it's so true. I'm excited, but I'm happy to wait because I know it'll be better. But let's get into net running in red. I mean, we know how a majority feels about it in 2020. It's been improved. Why don't you walk us through kind of, how net running is now, how they've kind of made it into that sort of elevator map system and just kind of how it works.
Yeah, so I mean, the changes they made, Cyberpunk 2020 had it where, you would get in a chair pretty much, jack in, and access everything remotely. Well, in Red, they've made it, the internet has collapsed, or the net has collapsed. So any sort of systems is all, localized to either a single system or maybe a building at most, or a mall size system if it's a really large one. But it's localized to that area, so that requires the Netrunner to actually get up and go to the location with a group, solos, or techs, such as our group, and interact with it locally. And instead of it being, obviously, in order to do that, and not be in an issue, is instead of being jacked in and you can't see anything, everything's using these virtual, like, goggles,
Yeah, virtuality
that
goggles.
virtuality goggles that are kind of like AR, to where the Netrunner wears them. They can see the real world, but then they also see this kind of net overlay on top of it.
Yeah,
And the
totally,
way that,
totally. Like you just said, it's like AR now, and like it's no
yeah,
longer like jacking into a system where like your body is in this comatose sort of position, and you're just completely in this on the internet. Now it's
or wearing VR goggles, like what we know,
right.
the Oculus, that we kind of have that vision of right now, where it's like completely blocks your view.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's an
exactly.
AR overlay. And like my character and my current thing, I have replaced my eyes, so I don't even have to wear goggles. The goggles are part of my eyes.
Yeah, I love that.
But they've structured it in such a way that instead of this giant over, like, matrix type thing, they kind of view it as an elevator where you have, floor 1, floor 2, floor 3. They also have branches. There's different, black ice you can throw in there. Hellhound is one of the ones that's in the jumpstart kit that,
Yeah,
kind of is one of the basic, just does brain damage, and can cause some other issues. So
but there's definitely a bunch of other, black ice versions that do all kinds of things,
oh
whether it
yeah.
affects your real life meat stats, like which I really enjoy that aspect. I mean, I know in the last games, anybody, if you've watched the live gameplay on Rio, Daniel's Netrunner had some serious movement issues going on because
He's had some difficulties. Usually doesn't isn't taking a lot of brain damage. Has some programs that assist with preventing some of that. But yeah, some of the black ice programs and the advanced rules that we have, aren't just damage. They can, cause you to, maybe not move as fast or
Yeah.
not have quite as much reflexing. You're limited in, a psychosomatic way rather than a you're just taking HP damage or whatever. So
Yeah,
it,
and
it
they
can affect when since you're out in the field, it can make the rest of the group, may have to, take that into consideration.
yeah, somebody might have to help you move along
Yeah.
once you can't move that far. And there's also black ice and things that can, attack your programs and things. So if you don't have it backed up on a drive or something, like that program's dead. So
Yeah,
there's
that
all
program
kinds of cool things.
and I think that's another great thing is they have, programs cost money. They're not, it's mostly programs are, night market type, things you find, or you go out and, in some of these old buildings in Night City and try to, recover technology and programs from there. Because, everything's still kind of in a disarray from, the fourth corporate war. So,
Yeah.
you're not it's not like the old days where it's, Raish is, making programs and, selling it, or, people are just writing programs willy-nilly. It's, a lot of it, like most things in Red,
Has to be
is
sourced.
found, has to be sourced, has to be found.
Yeah, I love that about Red too, because it makes, like in between campaigns and sessions and missions and jobs and all the stuff that keeps it going, there's just potential for little side sessions, one shots, and campaigns that come out of nowhere just because of the fact that Red is so different and difficult and interesting. Like you said, you have to source things, and like, I don't know, it just adds a whole another layer to the world where you can really just start making up other campaigns and get sessions within it, within normal life stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love
And
that.
I think that's the big difference with, Cyberpunk versus some other games is like Cyberpunk, you have to like there's more, I don't want to say more thought, but there's less issues in D&D being a murder hobo. And in Cyberpunk, if you turn into a murder hobo, you're going to run into issues,
Oh yeah.
presumably. So it's, you have to structure things and think about it in a more cerebral way. And I think the net running leads more into that because, there's these programs that'll do damage. And then, they've structured it to where, certain your cyber deck, which you still have in this version,
Yep.
has only so many slots depending on how expensive it is. And then the armor you're wearing may, dictate that, or some of your cyberware may dictate that. So you have to make choices of like, do I want programs that, fight Netrunners? Do I want programs that fight Black Ice? Do I want defensive programs? Do I want hardware that, backs things up or prevents, damage to you and your cyber deck, and all of these kind of things. And, I can't wait for, people to see the full rules because while the Jumpstart kit, definitely has a taste, there is a lot of cool stuff coming.
Yeah. No, totally. It has so much, and I bet you there's even going to be more when it comes out. Not to mention once they start getting into, the Black Chromebook and other things that they're going to be working on. Just imagine what other cool goodies they're going to come up with. It's exciting.
Yeah.
But back to the way net running kind of works and the way it is. So like, yeah, you got to be within 6 meters of a given system or an access point to a system. And then
Or you have to have some hardware that extends that potentially.
that's true too. Yeah, I love that there is hardware that you can do it from at least a little bit more distance.
Yeah.
And then there's also like kind of hardwired access points where like you have to like just physically jack in. Kind of old school style. But
Yeah.
regardless, you get in and like you said, it's more like an elevator. There's it just goes down 1 level, 2 level, 3. There's a definite bottom and stuff to every system, but it can branch off into any number of branches. And what's cool is aside from the encounters, like you might run into a Netrunner, you might run into, a Black Ice program of some type that does some type of attack in some way, like we talked about. There's also things like you've seen in our gameplay, like demons that control like real world, environment defenses and drones and things, which I think is really cool because it adds like an element of like an evil AI in the system,
Yeah, where it's, they have, it's a simple AI that has generally a simple task, but also can do some defense and, do things that, not just a singular program can do, that have a little more intelligence. So,
Yeah.
you have to combat those type of things along with everything else.
Yep. And then the other thing I really like is, not just obviously how streamlined it all works, but then to continue on with the net running, there's also things called control nodes for anyone not familiar. And I love those because it just gives, I don't know, like a different version of a weapon or some type of potential advantage or a cool little new toy to control or whatever. It's just this whole other third layer of element that comes into play because I always picture it's like the players are working in meat space. The Netrunner is in meat space, but they're AR in it. They're in the net, they're in the system, and then that's its own world. But then once they get that control node, it's like, man, it's kind of like branching those two, and I don't know. I always think that that's fun. Like, okay, what does this control node have access to? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you can, control turrets and control, any, cameras and any number of things, and potentially
Big cranes that
yeah,
grab
big
shipping
cranes, little
containers on
mechs,
docks and chuck them at yachts.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's a lot of options for that, and a lot of things that can be done with that. And then obviously, I'm hoping, in for, I'm sure some of the source books might have this, where like programming, like you can make your own, programs and demons and black ice that maybe can control things in a way that maybe you can leave them there as part of a virus, or
I'm
there's a lot
sure.
of things that you can, that potentially are able to be done the way they have it structured.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's a great point and good idea. Like, and I'm sure they're going to come out with a way, for a net runner at least, depending on the difficulty level or whatever, the contested role that they have to hit or some chart or something to create that. But I could definitely see that happening because look how, when you're leaving a system, you can create a virus,
Yeah,
and
and
that's
then
very
cloak
similar.
it in a way that like makes it much harder to find.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, you can cloak yourself, so like people don't know who is there or what you've done. You can drop viruses in. So I'm sure if they it's not going to be in the core, it'll be somewhere eventually or
Yeah.
something because it just makes sense and that's really cool.
And the
Um,
cool thing is going back to the original, concept of 2020 is, you got the net runner who can do, write viruses and fight black ice and all this other stuff, and they have so many, depending on their, interface stat, so many, net actions, but like it's structured in such a way that, they have, like my character has, three net actions, kind of the default. But they're relatively quick, and then you just rotate to the next person who's maybe in a firefight, or somebody who's searching a room, or so it's, you're part of the group,
yeah.
whereas in the past you were kind of not.
No, and sometimes it's been a little bit of both. Like I don't remember which session it was, but again back at those docks, and you were running and jacking into a system to control that crane or check out what was there again or something. And I think that security guard or the bouncer guy or whatever from the yacht or the security guy from those guys or whatever was coming at you, questioning you what you're doing out there. Somebody was. I remember that. So it was like
Yeah,
there's also that element of like, you've got to worry about yourself in the real world while you're doing the net running too. Like you said, like you're doing those moves, but then within that time, like somebody could be walking up on you or something as well.
yeah, and you gotta, you can make the decision to continue working on, the in the net, or you may need to take a shot, or do, duck behind some cover, or you might need to jack out, in which case, if you haven't quite finished what you're doing, you're gonna have to probably start over if you need to jack back in.
Yep. No,
Or you
exactly.
can just forcibly jack out and take your risk of maybe running into some black ice damage.
Exactly. Yeah, and the other thing too that I like is you have to jack out to safely get out because if you
Yeah.
just get out like you feel like you're taking too much damage or maybe in the meat space like I was just saying security guard's getting right up on you and you see he's pulling out a gun and in the next movie he's going to hit you and then something else is how you just got to get out of the system. If you don't jack out and you get pulled out like you're out of 6 meters away or a security guard grapples you and pulls you away or something happens like that, it's like the black ice gets an automatic attack on you. It's almost like what is it in D&D, an attack of opportunity?
Yeah, a talk of opportunity. So it's very much like that, where they have to, if you want to be force jacked out, because you need to run, or you're getting pulled away, or there's a program that forces you out, um, you know, you might take some damage.
Yeah. No, I love that. It makes sense, and it's like when you jack in, it's not just like, hopping online on your laptop, like you're jacking in, it's part of you. It's your neural system and stuff. So it makes sense that if you don't take time to kind of, shut down your computer properly, so to speak, or whatever,
Yeah.
you just kind of hold the button down and force it. Like there might be some issues,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know what I mean?
Some old computer style stuff of like, if you don't shut it down, you might run into problems.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So what's your favorite part? I mean, obviously, like, we've discussed how they streamlined it, right? But any of the specifics, like what is your favorite part of the changes that they've made, or at least your favorite part about net running in Red
I mean,
in
my
general?
favorite part is the fact that, like, as much as the concept of, like I said, and Neuromancer and the Johnny Mnemonic, which is also written by William Gibson, that gives you a, for those that well, it's gotten some grief for some of the acting, and interestingly enough, the main actor, John, Keanu Reeves, plays a character named Johnny. He's going to be playing a character named Johnny in 2077.
Yeah.
Um, but the idea of jacking in and dealing with programs. But I mean, my favorite part is still the idea of, like, you're part of the group. Like, there is no, because, and it's going to take some balancing to figure out what the best way to do it. But like, the idea of, you can be doing your thing, and then the solo can be fighting, and then maybe the tech is working on it, fixing something or however, but you're not, it's not just you the whole time, or it's not just, or if you're the net runner and you aren't in a program or aren't in the net, in architecture, you're useless. It's like, well, that's not, not the case either, because the way Cyberpunk is like, my character is not too far off, skill wise, from doing damage and whatnot, than even our solo.
Yeah.
So it's you still have to be able to defend yourself, and kind of be good in a fight, but obviously also interact with the net. So
No,
that's my favorite part, is the idea of that you are part of the group. Otherwise, I think it's far less interactive.
yeah, no, totally. I agree with that 100%. I think that's my favorite part too, is now it's inclusive, like you're part of the team and it's all interactive. Like sometimes they need you to do something and you need them to do something, and it's part of what's going on. Like you said, you get so many net actions, next player's turn. So it's kind of like, you're still part of what's up. It's really cool. It's not like you're just diving on the internet and, okay, everybody, hold on, let me get through all this.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what they've and some of the stuff, and like I said, we can't really read off directly, but I mean, the new, in the beta rules that we're working on, it's not just damage. You're not just taking damage, and it's like, oh, if I hit zero, I'm dead or potentially dead. It's, you might have some, to your move stat. If people have
Yeah.
watched the recent game, has seemed to be an Onryo thing, or your reflexes more affected, or you might not be able to, there's some programs you can't, jack out in the way you would like, or so you might need, since you can't move, like, physically away from the system, or can't move very fast, you kind of have to rely on your group to maybe watch your back. And then obviously, if you're in a system that needs to get some camera footage wiped away, or find some info, they kind of need you to do your job. So it is very much a team,
Yeah.
you know activity.
Yeah, exactly. I love that aspect of it. And then also, like you said, it's not the way it was before. And this goes for all roles, all characters, It's not, and that's what I love about Cyberpunk, is that it's not where, if you're a techie, you're just some nerdy dude with tools. If you're a net runner, you're just some nerdy dude who gets online. If you're a solo, okay, now you can fight good. It's more like the real world, in the sense that, like, just because you're into computers or you're into tech stuff or whatever, doesn't mean that somewhere along the line, you drop some skills in a handgun, or your melee, or you picked up some martial arts maybe. Like, you may not know everything. Like, it's still where you're going to want to use your points on more techie stuff or more net running stuff.
Yeah.
Just like a solo is probably going to be more well-rounded in all different weapons and things, like a little more. But it's not to say that you being a net runner, a techie, a med tech, or whatever, like I said, doesn't have, can't defend themselves, isn't somewhat able to fight. You know what I mean? And I love that. It's
Yeah,
more
and
real
I
world.
think that's one of the cool things about 20, versus 2020 versus red is like, red, while there's, overlap, you can, take weapon skills and whatever. Each role is very specific to that role. So like med techs have a very specific set of things they do. Netrunners obviously have the ability to jack in and interact in that way. Solos, even compared to the old thing where it was just like, oh, they get basically they're better at attacking. They get a whole list of things they can do that may make them a little bit faster in initiative, or may do
Take
some
less
more
damage.
damage,
Yeah,
or
do
take
more
less
damage.
damage or
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. And they can kind of change that per interaction, just to fit the thing. Nomads have the ability to source things in a in a certain way, and so on and so forth. So while there's cases where it's like, oh yeah, I can fight a little bit, you're still, solo is obviously the the fighter, the one that does the most, badass, shooting and fighting and martial arts and stuff like that. Netrunner's obviously the most of that, but you do have to have some overlap, otherwise you're going to be, potentially deficient in some ways that may catch up to you.
Oh yeah. No, and red
You
is
know,
so dangerous. Like Cyberpunk is always dangerous. 2020 always felt dangerous. But I feel like with what they did with red, it just feels even more cutthroat. Like they have this balance where like in red, everything's being rebuilt coming up. There's neocorps, everyone's like elbowing for some room and trying to figure out where they fit in, and just get a piece of the pie because it's all coming back up and it's rebuilding. So you almost feel a little hopeful, or like you have potential to make a change or be part of something bigger. But within that, there's still a balance of, but it's more cutthroat. Like you can't just go to the store and get what you need. You have to source things, and like there's the midnight markets versus night markets, and like it to me it just feels more brutal. You have to rely on nomads to get you through wastelands and city to city and travel and to do things typically, because it's rough.
yeah.
Somehow they made Cyberpunk even more rough and just dirty and gritty and dangerous, and but still have that balance of like, but I feel like I can make a fucking difference. I'm getting in this world as so and so, this player, this character. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
don't
and
know. I
I
love
think
it.
a good way to view it is like, you got Cyberpunk 2020 where it's like things were dangerous, but things were a little more structured. Law was, yeah, the combat zone had, effectively no law, but there was areas that did have law, and, were very much like, you do wrong, the police are going to come after you, or corporations are going to hunt you down. In 2077, at least from all the footage we've seen, things are mostly rebuilt. This, at least in that city where you're mainly at is, again, there's areas that are dangerous, but it seems like most things are mostly put together.
Yeah.
But red's kind of the wild west. Like
Yeah.
you're trying to make a name for yourself. Groups are trying to make names for themselves. You have these gangs that are trying to maybe cut a bigger slice of the pie than they have, or even get some pie. And so you're, everybody, like you said, is kind of trying to elbow their way into making a name for themselves, to where they didn't have it before, but now that with all these neocorps and everything's kind of in a chaos, they
Yeah.
may have an option to do that.
Yeah, and I feel like everyone's, I don't know, pissed off and grouchy and dangerous and short fused because there's like a lacking transportation, lacking communication, lacking full on internet. It's post nuclear fallout, so there's like toxic rains and like nasty shit everywhere, and like construction everywhere, and going into most establishments have like wash off centers if it's that toxic time of the day or night or week or whatever's going on, however the GM plays it. But it just feels like within everything else, there's this other sort of aesthetic, environmental layer that adds an extra fucked upness, I guess I'd put it on it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and I think a good, for people that I'm a huge Star Wars fan. It's kind
Yeah.
of like the difference between 2020, which is kind of the empire, and everything's very structured, but still kind of dangerous and broken. So where if people have seen it, the Mandalorian show is much more red. It's like
Yeah.
things are in chaos, the empire's gone, like everybody's kind of out for themselves. There's still leftovers from the past. There's some stuff that they're trying to set up for the future, which are the Disney movies, but
Yeah.
everything's the Mandalorian, and those, like, everything's kind of up for grabs.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good sort of reference for people if they're not familiar, but totally, it definitely feels like the wild, wild west sort of, vibe or whatever. I love it. It's just dangerous. So back to net running. Is there anything else that we forgot to cover about it? I just want to make sure we were kind of, without, like I said, without giving away too much or going too much detail. I want to make sure we mentioned at least a little bit of everything and kind of give people a general breakdown of how it works, a little beyond the Jumpstart kit.
Sure. I mean, it is one of those cases, and hopefully maybe once Red comes out, we can, maybe get
Revisit.
back together and go, once we can kind of read off the rules and everybody has a copy hopefully in front of them, we can get more into detail of the specifics of the mechanics. But I mean, it is, you got stuff that's your cyber deck's got so many slots. There's different hardware pieces that may affect to protect yourself from damage or from fires and stuff like that. There's stuff that may increase your range. There's stuff that, like, your armor makes a big difference, and they've kind of shown that in some of the 2077 where instead of you being in a chair, you're kind of wearing this suit that kind of protects you from bullets and other
Yeah.
melee weapons, but also has some extra things to keep the cyber deck out of your way and give you some additional features there. So I mean, it's some of the cool stuff that's coming, and like I said, we'll once the game comes out, truly we can go into more detail rather than just reading off the rules. But
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff that I'm super pumped for.
Yeah, and you just reminded me, one other thing I really like is like the speed boosting program that Speedy
Yeah,
Gonzalez. It's not Gonzalez. What is it?
it's Gonzalez, I think. It's
Gonzalez. That's
one of
what it is.
those very
Gonzalez.
being
Gonzalez.
being from California, Gonzalez is a very common name here. So, every time I read it, that's what I immediately think of. But it is, I think it's supposed to be
Gonzalez.
Gonzalez.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
there's all these programs that increase your speed that give you better capabilities to do backdoors and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So you can,
and you need that because one thing too, a feature of the net running is if you do enter a level of that elevator, you drop down a level, you go to the next level. If you run into some type of black ice, it's always like just like when you enter combat and everybody rolls initiative. It's very similar to that, where like you're trying to get the jump on them and just get a better roll on that initiative when you run into a black ice. Otherwise, like you're taking that damage or they're taking that damage. Like it's
yeah. So
whoever
you
gets
want
that
to
first hit.
increase your speed,
Yeah, so that's what I like about those
so you
speed programs
don't
and
get hit.
yeah,
And that's the thing that's one of my favorite things of the new stuff is you only have so many slots, so you really have to make decisions of like, do I want to be super aggro, do I want to be defensive, do I want to be a mix of the two, do I want to spend a lot of my slots on hardware type stuff.
yeah,
It's not like a lot of things where it's like, well, I just have access to using a D&D kind of reference. The Netrunner is kind of one of the, like, a spellcaster, and it's not like you have access to every spell. You may have access to slot that, but you only have so many slots you can use at any one
yeah. You
kind of
gotta
time.
you gotta find those scrolls.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, and there might be the cases where, and I kind of thought this recently, where you might have different cyber decks depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a
You
great
might have
idea.
an attack cyber deck or a defensive cyber deck, or obviously at that point you're getting into some
Money.
high eddies, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because that's the other thing about Red is it's definitely like things are expensive. You have to source them, and then you're just not getting money thrown at you as much. I feel like 2020, it felt like there's lots of jobs. You got paid well. You could go to the store and buy stuff. It feels like with Red, things are a little more expensive. You have to source them. There's more of a process to being able to get goodies and things and buy them. It's just a bigger process. And then there's more of a process of earning money. Like things are just more dangerous to get it.
well, just like the kind of the wild wild west is like everybody needs work. Everybody
Yeah.
needs a part of that pie, and because it's a pie, there's less available for everyone. So you have to really prove that you're the one worthy of getting that. So be it solo net running, you might have to spend more time doing dealing with fixtures and making contacts and stuff like that, where it's just like rather than going to a bulletin board and be like, well, this job, as out of 30 that are listed here, is I'll take that one.
Yeah.
There's more involved, I think, in red.
No, most definitely. Definitely. So yeah, I love everything that we discussed. I think we covered just about everything that we can, at least. Like you said, when Red officially comes out, we'll revisit this topic and we'll get into detail. I want to do, a complete net running, breakdown. I want to do like a whole mechanics thing. Like it's gonna be fun. I want to do that with every role. Once the official book comes out, we'll be hitting a lot more details. But as far as this episode, I think we touched base on as much as we can, and I think it was a lot of fun, and we covered some great topics. Hopefully, if you're listening, you got something out of it and enjoyed learning something new about the way net running works in Red. Or if you're just a fan of net running, you just love chatting about it or hearing about it. Like me, I love Cyberpunk so much I could listen to any topic about it. I love it all. But yeah, if you're checking it out, you're listening to this, please, give us a share, give us a like, give us a follow and subscribe. Check out the link in the description. Hit up cyberpunkuncensored.com and see all the cool things we have going on. We got some cool discounts from sponsors on the partner page and just a lot of cool stuff. So, and tune into the live gameplay. Come see Daniel do some net running. I think our next game is this coming Tuesday. We typically have been playing on Tuesdays, but yeah, tune in and check out some of the live gameplay. Any last words here before I cut us off and put an end to this episode?
No, I just appreciate you having me on, and hope to come back and get into some more nitty gritty of
Yeah,
how the mechanics work.
most definitely. Yeah, we'll do it again. So yeah, thanks for joining me, man, and I'll see you in the next game. And everybody listening, thanks so much. Take care.
Yep, take care.